and you don't have to bail them out with public funds, which is what we have done, of course, with great enthusiasm during the last year. Okay. Now, there is, as you can imagine, a lot of reluctance to go this way. Paul Krugman had a column, I think, 10 days ago, in which he was talking about he was lamenting the extent to which what he calls corporate cash has degraded our political system's ability to deal with real problems. In other words, there's a lot of lobbying, there's a lot of interests from the financial sector, basically, that are very, very working kind of over time, to try to prevent reforms from going in this direction. And there are other problems as well. I mean, one of the reasons why perhaps you will sense a little bit of pessimism on my part about the lessons that we have learned from the crisis and our ability to deal with them has to do with other factors. There is a professor at Princeton, Alan Blinder, who has sort of, for us, identified a few of these factors. He says, for instance, well, the financial crisis is yesterday's problem. We have very short-term memories. Right? Now we're out of it, we forget about it. It's a sort of kind of an inertia. That while we're in the middle of it, we say to ourselves, "Oh, we have to do something about this. This must never happen again." And in fact, politicians are on the record as having said this. But now that the crisis is behind us, then we are on to other things. Now, which is the second point that Blinder makes, that we have a very busy legislative agenda in the United States. A lot of, we have a new administration that is very ambitious in terms of what it wants to do. You saw President Obama's fine speech before the US Congress last week on health reform and so on. And so, some people say, well, financial reform is not going to get done simply because people are just too busy doing other things. Then there's also the issue of kind of bureaucratic infighting, because at the moment, you have certain institutions responsible for certain kinds of supervision. And if you do reform of the regulatory system, some of these responsibilities are going to be allocated in other ways and in other, to other people, to other institutions. And people don't like to lose turf, as the saying goes. And yet another dimension to this is that banking regulation is an extremely boring subject. In fact, I can't see you very well from where I'm sitting, but I've already been speaking for about 8 minutes on the subject of financial regulation, and I would not be surprised if some of your eyes are beginning to glaze over, right? Because it is a very, very dry subject, and it is very, very difficult to get the public excited, about the need to reform the financial system, because then you need to get into all kinds of very arcane materials. Sort of health reform, on the other hand, is a very sexy subject. It's very easy to get passionate about it. President Obama gave a speech about health reforms, which I'm sure he would not be able to give about, banking regulation, to get the whole country excited about regulating the banking system. Let me finish this part of these brief remarks by going back to Amartya Sen. Like him, I do believe that the lack of transparency in the workings of the global financial system has been very much at the heart of the present crisis. How the authorities been a little bit more vigilant and more effective in monitoring the growth of all these, as Warren Buffett called them, this sort of weapons of financial mass destruction. It's quite conceivable that the crisis would not have been as intense as it has been. Sen says, or he notes, that societies operate better under some presumption of trust, and that therefore they will benefit from greater openness. And let me just quote something that he wrote in that financial piece. He said that the far-reaching consequences of mistrust and lack of confidence in others, which have contributed to generating this crisis and are making a recovery so very difficult, would not have